When we think of ancient Europe, most people immediately think of the Romans, their cities, legions, emperors, and roads. But Europe of that era was not only Roman. Beyond the borders of the empire existed a completely different world. A world of tribes that the Romans collectively called the Germanic peoples. And among them, one name appears again and again in Roman sources, the Suebi. The Suebi were not a single tribe in the way we understand a nation today. They were a loose confederation of many Germanic tribes, united by a similar way of life, shared cultural traits, and above all, a reputation as formidable warriors. To the Romans, the Suebi embodied the threat from the north, something dangerous, unpredictable, and impossible to fully control or civilize. The earliest references to the Suebi come from Roman authors, most notably Julius Caesar, and later the historian Tacitus. It is important to understand that the Suebi themselves left no written records. Everything we know about them comes from the perspective of their enemies. And that means some descriptions may be exaggerated, biased, or simplified. According to Caesar, the Suebi were exceptionally warlike, hardened by a harsh lifestyle and constant movement. They were not permanently settled in one place. They established villages, farmed the land, but when necessary they could abandon everything and move on. This mobility gave them a significant advantage. They were not dependent on cities, walls, or infrastructure. The origins of the Suebi lie in Central Europe, in regions that today include Germany, the Czech Republic, and Poland. The territory of modern-day Bohemia and Moravia was one of the key centers of Suebi settlement. Tribes such as the Marcomanni and the Quadi lived there, and later played a crucial role in conflicts with Rome. Suebi society was built around warrior values. That does not mean they were chaotic barbarians. They had structure, traditions, and customary laws. At the top stood chieftains, whose authority was based on personal bravery, leadership in battle, and the respect of their warriors. These were not hereditary kings in the modern sense, but leaders followed because they proved themselves worthy. One of the most distinctive features of Suebi culture was the so-called Suebi knot. Tacitus describes it as a hairstyle in which men tied their hair into a knot, either on the top or the side of the head. This was not merely a fashion choice. It was a symbol of freedom, adulthood, and warrior identity. Wearing the Suebi knot was a clear statement of who you were. Daily life among the Suebi was not only about warfare. Most of them were farmers. They cultivated grain, raised livestock, and hunted. Their villages consisted of simple wooden buildings with thatched roofs. Life was harsh, but largely self-sufficient. This combination of agriculture and warfare made the Suebi especially dangerous opponents. The first major encounters between the Suebi and Rome occurred during the expansion of the Roman Republic. Julius Caesar describes them as one of the main reasons why Rome never fully conquered Germania. The Suebi could gather quickly, strike hard, and disappear just as fast. They did not fight by Roman rules of warfare. What followed was a long and complex period of conflict between the Suebi and Rome, marked by shifting alliances, devastating wars, and moments that fundamentally changed the balance of power in Central Europe. One of the earliest and most dramatic confrontations occurred in the 1st century BC, when the Suebi, under the leadership of a powerful chieftain named Ariovistus, entered Gaul. Ariovistus was not just a tribal leader, he was a warlord capable of uniting multiple Suebi groups and leading tens of thousands of warriors. At first, he was even recognized by Rome as a king and ally, but the situation quickly escalated. Ariovistus demanded land, tribute, and hostages from Gallic tribes, pushing deep into Roman spheres of influence. Julius Caesar eventually confronted him in 58 BC. The resulting conflict was one of the most important early clashes between Rome and the Germanic world. Although Caesar ultimately defeated Ariovistus in battle, the victory was costly and unsettling. It became clear that Rome was facing enemies very different from the organized armies of the Mediterranean world. The Suebi fought fiercely, relied on massed infantry charges, and were willing to risk everything in open combat. Even in defeat, the Suebi were not destroyed. They simply withdrew back across the Rhine, and in doing so, they reinforced a key Roman fear. Germania could not be conquered permanently. It could only be punished, pushed back, and watched. In the centuries that followed, Suebi tribes such as the Marcomanni and the Quadi grew stronger in the regions north of the Danube. Under their king Marabodius, the Marcomanni established a powerful and surprisingly well-organized realm in Bohemia. Marabodius ruled not as a wandering chieftain, but as a monarch with a standing army and diplomatic relations with Rome. Rome viewed him as both a threat and a potential ally. At times, diplomacy prevailed. At other times, war seemed inevitable. Although a direct Roman invasion of Marabodius' kingdom never fully materialized, his realm represented something new, a centralized Suebi power capable of rivaling Roman authority beyond the frontier. Internal rivalries, however, were a constant feature of Suebi politics. Leadership was often contested, alliances shifted, and conflicts between Suebi groups were common. These internal struggles weakened their unity, but they also ensured that the Suebi remained dynamic and adaptable. The most dramatic chapter of Suebi-Roman conflict came during the Marcomannic Wars in the late 2nd century AD. Pressure from other migrating peoples pushed Suebi tribes southward, and in a series of coordinated attacks, the Marcomanni, Quadi, and allied groups crossed the Danube and smashed through Roman defenses. Entire Roman provinces were devastated, cities were destroyed, trade routes collapsed, and panic spread across the empire. In one shocking moment, Germanic warriors reached northern Italy itself, something that had not happened since the time of Hannibal. The Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius, personally led the defense of the empire. For over a decade, Rome fought desperate campaigns along the Danube frontier. These were not quick, punitive expeditions, but brutal wars of survival. The Suebi proved to be resilient enemies, capable of regrouping even after heavy losses. Although Rome eventually restored control, the cost was enormous. The empire was exhausted, its army overstretched, and its borders permanently weakened. The Marcomannic Wars marked a turning point. From this moment onward, Rome was no longer expanding, it was defending. After these wars, many Suebi were settled inside Roman territory as foederati, allied peoples who provided soldiers in exchange for land. Others remained beyond the frontier, watching and waiting as Roman power slowly declined. During the Migration Age, Suebi groups once again took advantage of Rome's weakness. In the early 5th century, they crossed the Rhine together with Vandals and Alans. This was no longer a single raid, but a mass movement of peoples. The Suebi carved out territories as they moved westward, seizing land, plundering cities, and fighting both Roman forces and rival Germanic tribes. Their final major territorial gain came in Hispania, where they established a kingdom in Galicia. This marked the transformation of the Suebi from a migratory warrior confederation into a settled ruling elite. Kings such as Hermeric and Rakir attempted to build a stable state, balancing Roman traditions with Germanic customs. Yet even here, conflict never ceased. The Suebi fought wars against neighboring Roman authorities, against local populations, and against other Germanic kingdoms, especially the Visigoths. Over time, internal divisions and military defeats weakened them. In the end, their kingdom fell not to Rome, but to another Germanic power. The Visigoths conquered the Suebi realm in 585 AD, bringing their independent political history to an end. While the wars between the Suebi and Rome dominate the historical record, conflict was not limited to the Roman frontier alone. Suebi history was also shaped by struggles among themselves. Rival chieftains, competing tribal groups, and shifting coalitions that constantly redefined their power. Unlike Rome, the Suebi had no permanent central authority that could enforce unity over generations. Leadership depended on personal strength, success in war, and the loyalty of warriors. When a leader failed, he was abandoned. When a stronger rival emerged, conflict was inevitable. These internal struggles often erupted into open warfare between Suebi tribes, weakening their ability to act as a single force. Rome understood this weakness very well. Rather than attempting costly and uncertain conquests beyond the Rhine and Danube, Roman emperors increasingly relied on diplomacy, manipulation, and strategic interference. Roman gold, titles, and recognition were used to favor certain Suebi leaders over others. By supporting one chieftain against another, Rome ensured that Suebi unity remained fragile. This policy proved effective. Powerful Suebi leaders like Marabodius were isolated diplomatically, while rivals were encouraged. When Marabodius was eventually overthrown, it was not by Roman legions, but by internal rebellion. Rome had learned that it could shape events beyond its borders without direct conquest. Yet this strategy had long-term consequences. As Rome weakened politically and militarily in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the same fragmented Suebi world that Rome had manipulated became unpredictable and increasingly dangerous. Without a strong Roman presence to stabilize the frontier, local conflicts escalated into wider migrations and large-scale violence. Another important but often overlooked aspect of Suebi warfare was their adaptability. Over time, Suebi warriors began to adopt Roman equipment, tactics, and organization. Shields, helmets, swords, and even elements of Roman military discipline appeared among Suebi fighters. Many had served in Roman armies as auxiliaries before returning to their own people. This created a new kind of enemy, warriors who understood Roman strengths and weaknesses from the inside. By the late Roman period, Suebi warbands were no longer simply raiders attacking frontier villages. They were capable of conducting prolonged campaigns, sieges, and coordinated operations alongside other Germanic groups. This evolution made them valuable allies and terrifying enemies. Their participation in the Great Crossing of the Rhine in 406 AD marked a final transformation. What began centuries earlier as tribal resistance against Roman expansion had now become a force contributing directly to the collapse of Roman authority in the West. The Suebi did not destroy Rome alone, but through centuries of warfare, adaptation, and survival, they played a crucial role in reshaping the balance of power in Europe. They were not merely reacting to Rome, they were learning from it, and ultimately outlasting it. The Suebi were not a single tribe, but a coalition of many so-called barbarian peoples. Through their fearlessness and adaptability in the face of Rome, they helped shape the course of European history. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.